At Rolls-Royce, we've made a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050. Rachael Everard, Head of Sustainability at Rolls-Royce, has come to meet Lieutenant General Richard Nugee to find out how the MOD are planning for a more sustainable future and how Rolls-Royce can help.
Richard, great to meet you.
Very good to meet you. How are you? Well,
Beautiful day.
some beautiful trees.
Shelter under this tree.
Yes.
Richard, I wanted to start by asking, I've been reading about your career and it's a long and distinguished career in the military, and then in the last few years you've really pivoted to focus on sustainability and climate change. Can I ask what changed?
So I've been interested in climate change for about 10 years, but what I think I saw was that the MOD wasn't really doing it seriously. They weren't really understanding the implications of climate change, either for the security of our country or for the great opportunities that arise out of what's happening in the climate change world. And I'd done quite a lot of reading, so I just thought, actually, the MOD could take real advantage from this, and so I proposed it to the MOD.
And they listened.
And they listened. I'm amazed, but they listened.
I suppose that climate change and defence, it's a challenge on many fronts, but as you say, a great opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge because we are great emitters. That's mostly to do with our fuel, which is both our sort of jet aircraft, but our ships. Funnily enough, tanks don't take up much fuel at all in comparison to jets and aircraft and ships. And so it's a really big problem for us in that we've got a lot of emissions. It's a big problem for us in that we automatically create a degree of waste. And so tackling that is a fantastic challenge, but there's opportunity.
And that's where a company like Rolls-Royce can hopefully help.
Well, I'm firmly convinced that technology is a very large part of solving this problem, both globally, but also for the MOD. So I think Rolls-Royce can help enormously because some of the things that Rolls-Royce are looking at and are doing, both to reduce emissions, but importantly, it goes back to this point about opportunity. If we can become more self-sufficient on a deployed operation, then actually that reduces our logistics supply chain, and that means we save money, we save equipment, and we save lives. And so actually there's a lot that Rolls-Royce can do to help us to become more self-sufficient and at the same time reduce emissions.
And I suppose by reducing those vulnerabilities, you also increase your resilience and your ability to respond.
Absolutely, and I'll take just one small example of Helmand. In Afghanistan, where I spent nearly 2 years in Afghanistan. What you've got there is we were putting diesel down the roads all the way from wherever we bought it, under intense pressure from the Taliban, at times on logistic supply patrols, as they are logistic combat patrols they became. And why were they combat patrols? Because they had helicopters above them, they had infantry supporting them just to get the fuel through. And what was that fuel doing? Yes, it was fueling our vehicles, and we want to try and reduce the amount of fuel that our vehicles use, but it was also fueling all our generators to provide electricity for Bastion Camp. If we'd gone solar for a lot of it with some batteries, actually we would have reduced the amount of fuel coming down the road, it would have reduced the amount of infantry, reduced the amount of helicopters, and reduced the loss of life. And then when you look at the cost of that fuel, we think on average it was something in the region of about £250 for 4 litres of fuel.
Oh, it's a bit higher than today's petrol prices.
So even with inflated prices, it's a bit higher than that. So it was costing us a huge amount of money. So if we can do something to reduce that cost, reduce cost of lives, reduce the amount of infantry and armour and aviation that's needed to just get the fuel through, that can be used more effectively at what it should be doing, which is taking the fight to the enemy.
And then you create sustainable operations at the very heart because you're having that multiple benefits.
Absolutely, and you know, there's different technologies that will produce recycled water. We are thinking about, I don't think it would be any better than that, about vertical farms. Can we do our own food in some respects? Anything to reduce that logistics supply chain. Anything that we do there will increase our combat effectiveness, and that's the key. This is all about actually both enhancing our combat effectiveness, our ability to fight, and making sure that we're more sustainable.
Richard, you talked about resilience just now, and I think a company like Rolls-Royce and the whole sector needs to become more resilient, and hopefully we can work together to achieve that. And I do believe that technology will play a really important role. Things like microgrids, and you talked about sustainable fuels and the need to reduce that reliance on shipping in fossil-based fuels all the time, not just from an environmental perspective, but also from that resilience perspective.
Yes, I mean, I think this is where the real opportunity lies. And I think technology, yes, there's a behavioural aspect to it. And from a behavioural aspect, of course, your emissions as a company are our Scope 3 emissions. So the emissions we have sort of responsibility for, and if we're going to genuinely get rid of all the emissions or reduce significantly all the emissions in defence, you've got to help us.
And equally, your emissions are our Scope 3.
Exactly. So we've got to help each other. And there's a really important point here about, because we're tied in at a completely different level, I would argue, to a financial position, it begs the question of why can't we be much more in partnership? And I argued in my report, and I would argue consistently, that actually if we can have a much stronger partnership between defence industry and defence, it's difficult, and I appreciate there's all sorts of problems with partnerships, but actually if you can do that, then actually it's a better approach, because we've both got to reduce our emissions to get to net zero for the country. But it's far more than that, actually. It's about what new technologies will produce. So take microgrids. Take resilience of us having our own electricity supply for our bases, whether that's through solar, whether that's through wind on occasional basis, or geothermal, or whatever it is. If we have a microgrid, we are by definition almost much more efficient with our power, and therefore both saving money and reducing emissions, while power is created using emissions. So we've got a piece here about actually Rolls-Royce microgrids. I think they offer us an opportunity for more efficiency. And the important piece here, go back to military capability. If I save money on the huge electricity bill that we have in the MOD, which is hundreds of millions of pounds, if I save money there and say halve it, then I've got that money, let's call it £100 million for the sake of argument, it's not the right figure, but I've got 100 million I can spend on more equipment, or improving the welfare of our people, or whatever it is that the MOD wants to spend it on, which adds to military capability. So this isn't just a nice idea to try and reduce emissions, although that is the byproduct almost. It's a fantastic byproduct. This is about actually being more efficient. So microgrids do that. I'm really excited by the prospects of micronuclear. Now, I don't know whether that's going to be viable. I know that it's a good few years away yet. But if we can produce a micronuclear plant in somewhere like Bastion, if we ever go back to somewhere like that, we don't need any sort of fuel coming through for generating power. And so actually you've got opportunity there which will make it just much more effective. Why wouldn't we do that if it's there? We can't do this without industry. We have to have the same thought process. We have to have the same approach to it.
Yes.
And I asked, say, D&S, look at everything through a sustainability lens. Look at everything through what would the difference be if you had to recycle that? If I ordered you to recycle that, and of course I can't do that, but if you were ordered to recycle that, what difference would it make to the design?
Yeah, and how do you think a company, a partner like Rolls-Royce can really help with that capability, I suppose, that enterprise-wide mindset?
So here I think this is, it's all about innovation. It's about allowing innovation. Now, innovation in big companies is quite difficult. There's a bureaucracy in every big company. There's a massive bureaucracy in any government department. Of course there is. So it's difficult, but actually allowing innovation. And I went down to Filton, the Bristol Rolls-Royce place, and saw one person's idea about how to create energy from a jet engine, how to create electricity from a jet engine. It was his one idea. He was so excited about it. But what was impressive actually with Rolls-Royce is the whole board went down to see his idea. It's in a tiny little piece, and he's got a jet engine and he's got an electrical supply sort of thing which comes off it. One idea from one employee could provide, and I mean, I don't know how you'd use it, but could provide the most amazing output. That's what we need throughout the whole of defence industry, is allow those innovations to take place. And then we will be the beneficiaries, but so will industry.
Yeah, and Rolls-Royce is full of stories like that. There's one ideas, but I think it's absolutely right, as we talked about earlier, the passion of our people to help in this, to bring forward ideas, to innovate and to think differently, I think is so important.
Yeah, I agree.
How important do you think thinking digitally and sustainably is to the defence?
Well, I think a digital approach, a digital mindset offers opportunity again. And as I say, most of what I've been talking about is about opportunity. And that's where we need to really put the mindset. Why is digital important? You can create digital twins. You can predict what is going to happen as on a digital backbone rather than doing it for real. So you've got some confidence. I think a lot of this is about trying to build confidence that this isn't going to diminish our capability, this isn't going to cost a fortune, but that actually this is about something that is going to improve what we do, save money, and at the same time reduce emissions, which is fantastic, for example, or improve our sustainability. You can use digital to create alternative, if you like, alternative universes, which then you can populate, and then decide how you do it. But it's more than that. In order to really get to the bottom of this, we need to understand what's happening, and you can only do that with a digital mindset, I would argue. You need to understand what is doing where. I was talking to somebody about near misses, and the Air Force have tons and tons and tons of near misses for every accident.
Yeah. And
they put monitors on just about everything to try and make sure that they know what's going on. Contrast that with the Army, where actually they don't have monitors on all their equipment and everything, and they don't have a digital understanding of what is going on in those equipments. And the net effect is when something breaks, it breaks. You have no prediction that it's going to break at all, and it just stops. And so if we can use the digital mindset, digital about monitoring, digital about building a digital awareness picture, building digital twins, then actually what you end up with is, again, a much more efficient system, which is more effective, which is probably in the long run cheaper, or I would argue is almost always cheaper. And by the way, will save emissions, because the more efficient you are and more effective you are, the cheaper.
And I suppose you can replace some of your physical assets with digital assets. So an example being some of your product testing, we are moving some of that to digital-based modelling rather than having to run all of the physical tests, which in turn reduces emissions.
I'll give you one brilliant example of that, which is synthetic training for the Air Force. If instead of flying an F-35 at the cost of the fuel, at the costs of the environment, at the cost of spares, at the cost of people, you do exactly the same flight in a simulator, which is all digital, then you end up with none of those costs that I've just mentioned, apart perhaps the cost of the pilot, and you end up with a much better outcome, because you can crash it far more often than you'd ever want to do, and you can push it to the limits.
Yeah.
There's also a military capability piece to this as well, which is that in a synthetic environment, you can do things with that jet, the F-35 for example, that you wouldn't want to show the enemy that you have the capability to do. And therefore what you do is you test that jet to the limits, you invent new tactics for the jet and all the rest of it, and new ways of flying it. You don't want the enemy to know that you can do that, so that when you actually have to fly against them, you could catch them completely by surprise. You can do that in a synthetic environment. You wouldn't want to do that in the real environment, where it can be seen by your enemy or by your adversary. And so actually a digital environment offers you, again, greater opportunity to experiment, as well as saving all those other bits that I talked about.
So Richard, we've talked this morning about a number of different areas where Rolls-Royce are obviously working in collaboration with defence, microgrids, sustainable fuels, electrification of trainer aircraft, lots of excitement. What would you say to our people? How can they get involved? How can they support your goals?
I think there's two things at least, I would say. One is As an introduction to that, I would say we're all in this together. It is in all our interest to get this right. This is a commercial interest, but this is also a planetary interest in terms of improving the environment. But let's not forget there's a commercial side to this as well. So it is commercially viable for us. It is environmentally sensible for us, and that's why we're doing this. This is about improving military capability. So what I would ask Rolls-Royce to do is to do two things. One is to allow innovation, to come to us with innovation and try and build those opportunities with us, so that, because we're not going to be able to do it all ourselves, and if we don't buy from you, you're not going to be able to do it to any value. So working together to do that, and working as much in partnership in terms of innovation. The second thing I would do is I would ask you to look at everything you do through a sustainability lens. What difference would that make? If you look at every aspect of your process, of your operation, of how you run your business, but also of the products that you create, if you looked at it through somebody who was determined to make it the most sustainable possible, economically viably, what would that do to your company, and how could that help us become more sustainable?
I think that's a really important message. I think every single person at Rolls-Royce and every single person at the MOD and every single person in the defence and wider sector can make a difference here, and that's so important.
Absolutely. This is about behaviour, this is about innovation, but this is so important. It's important. We have done damage to the planet. Let's just admit that.
Yeah.
If we carry on the way we are, we're going to do more damage. We've got to try and reverse that trend. All of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.